Okay, so this is the day where we talk about the biggest pop culture stories of the week. I am particularly excited to talk about why everyone seems to hate this new Apple ad. I haven't seen a response like this to an ad in a long time, honestly. The group chat is here, they're ready to go, so let's dive on in. I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, today on the podcast, Leila Latif is here, Paul Myers is here, and for the very first time in the group chat, Vikram Murthi's here. What's good, everybody? Welcome to the show. How are we feeling? Hello.
Hey.
I'm
Hello.
delighted that you're all here. We have a lot to talk about. We'll get to this new Apple ad in just a second. Also, there's a new Doctor Who to talk about. I want to get to that in a moment. But we're going to return first to a story that we covered on the show a few weeks back because everyone is still talking about it. Everyone is still talking about Baby Reindeer. Okay, so the series is created by the actor and comedian Richard Gadd. It is inspired by an alleged real-life stalker that he met. In that show, the character's name is Martha. And here's the thing. Baby Reindeer got big. And I mean so big that everyone was talking about it. It is the kind of show that was an unexpected hit for Netflix. But that massive success ended up spawning a massive online effort to identify the real-life Martha. This week, she did an interview. She did an interview with Piers Morgan. Her name is Fiona Harvey. Here she is talking about Gadd and the show.
He asked me to sleep with him with a big green spot in his face one day. I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested.
He asked you to do what?
He asked me to sleep with him. He said, would I like my curtains fixed? And I laughed. And he said, that's a euphemism. Do you want me to come home with you? And I said, I've got a boyfriend. I gave him the brush off big time, I think. You know,
Why?
subtly so, but the bottom line is,
didn't
I think
fancy
this
him?
is behind him. No, I don't fancy him. I don't fancy little boys without jobs.
Fiona Harvey talking to Piers Morgan. Look, in the interview, she says she's received death threats after the show's come out. She's denied stalking Gadd, and she also claims that he and Netflix got a bunch of facts wrong. Guys, I'm uncomfortable about everything that has to do with this story. I've been uncomfortable for weeks when it comes to Baby Reindeer, but we got to get into it. Leila, I'll start with you. You're in the UK. What's been the sort of media reaction to the interview after it's aired?
I mean, I think I kind of like sum it up with ick.
Yes.
Yeah, Piers Morgan is not a very beloved figure when it comes over here. I mean, he's considered to be quite controversial and someone that will sort of do anything for a story, particularly in the wake of the phone hacking scandals that happened here. This just feels so darkly exploitative, and there's simply no angle that you can kind of take on this story that makes you feel good about it. Because either I think on the part of Netflix and Richard Gadd, even if I entirely take his events as gospel, they needed to have done way more to make sure that the internet sleuths that we all know are out there could not track down this woman, because even by his estimation, she's a vulnerable person that maybe is not terribly well. Piers Morgan platforming this is just kind of so horrible. So many of the things that she says around sexuality and mental health and trauma are just horrifying. But I'm a culture journalist. I'm I'm the sort of lowest tier of seriousness of journalists. But even I was this is the most despicable level of journalism. There's a famous quote that they often tell you of if you're a journalist and somebody says that it's raining and somebody says that it's not raining, it's not your job to quote them both. It's your job to go out and find out what happened. And Piers Morgan has entirely failed to do this in this. And it's just, I don't know, it's just so depressing. Depressing.
I've been trying to process my thoughts about whether this interview should have happened at all, because on the one hand, if Richard Gadd's, and Netflix's creation of the show is to be taken as what they tell us, the show says it's based on, true events that happened to Richard Gadd. And you're right, they didn't do a lot to protect this person. They didn't do a lot to protect this particular person because they quoted some of the tweets kind of verbatim, and it did not take people very long at all to identify who the real person is. And on the other hand, I have this question about whether she should get to speak for herself. And so I keep going back and forth about whether this interview should have happened at all. I'm certain it should have happened like this, but is there a place, Leila, where this interview should have happened? Do you see that world at all?
I see like a world in which like we have like proper protections for like the mental health of like the people involved. We
Yeah.
have people that are like trained, protected. There should have been somebody sat out there with her. I mean, it's not an easy thing for anyone, even somebody who's a kind of seasoned public figure, to sit down and be grilled for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Most of us would fall apart under those circumstances. Yeah. So I think like the duty of care was abominable with this, but also every single question is just kind of designed to be like so like titillating and salacious.
Yes.
Everything is open. He says that like constantly, if just like, oh, well, wouldn't that arrest be on public record? Piers, where's your research team? That's what you should do as your program. You shouldn't let somebody out there to, best case scenario or worst case scenario, however you view it, either they're telling the truth or they're entirely fictitious. Either way, you needed to find that out and not just kind of have that opened up to the court of public opinion. I honestly, I think this is like despicable.
Vikram, Leila used the phrase duty of care, which I think to me, like, that is also my reading, that duty of care was like not particularly present in this particular case. You've seen the interview. Was there anything that made you, as you were watching the show, reconsider how you felt about Baby Reindeer, the mostly fiction, I suppose, show that, was on Netflix?
I mean, I should say that I think when any sort of autobiographical, semi-autobiographical art, I think that there's going to be multiple versions of the same events. I definitely think that if you're going to make a stage show and a TV show about something traumatic that happened to you, the person who perpetrated the trauma is inevitably going to have their own take on it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with someone saying, hey, this is this thing that's massive, that's out there, that's about me. I have my version of these events. Just to jump off of what Leila was saying, I do think that this was probably the worst possible way for that type of interview to go down, type of revelation to go down. I think that the entire thing reeks of opportunism on both sides, both from Piers and both from this woman. I definitely think that it doesn't make me change how I feel about the show. I think the show is also just like an artistic rendering of someone's personal experiences. I think there's inevitably going to be, elisions and sort of inventions. And while I think that there might be some conversation that would happen if it's found out that all of this is made up, I somehow slightly doubt that all of it is completely fictionalized. But that's a conversation for another time. As of right now, the interview mostly makes me feel sad and depressed about how it went down and this person and the vulnerability of everyone involved. But it doesn't really change my opinion of the show at all, really.
Paul, we sat, in the show, our panel sat in the show, and we sort of called it a sort of modern masterpiece, because it is. I think I do think the show, to me, works on so many levels. It is well rendered. It sort of renders I think like a really traumatic story, and you get to engage with it in ways that maybe you don't get to engage with a lot of television this way. I found it really engaging. It really worked for me. But then bringing in this sort of reality has kind of distorted the conversation around the show, because suddenly this person, this real life Fiona Harvey, has to answer in some ways for the fictional version that people see in the show. That feels broken to me. But then you watch this interview, like, do you feel like Fiona had to like redeem herself in any way? And did she? Or is that even a requirement at all in this particular moment?
Well, my first thought is, and I should point out that I've been a musician for years, and I've known musicians of all genders, shall we say, that everyone I know knows somebody who's had this happen, who's been a public performer, and this kind of thing. Not as extreme as this. Richard Gadd, and then just to go back to that, Richard Gadd did a great job of creating, as Vikram said, a fictionalized account that got the essence of how it felt to him, and made a very smart thing at the beginning to say, this is fiction. This is, and I don't know about this duty of care aspect from one angle. I don't know how, when you see Fiona Harvey, you say to yourself, well, she's not that far from the character. So that they could have done a lot of different covering of that track, But as far as Fiona coming on this show, I actually think she could have said nothing. What I could have said was nothing. She could have not, but she kind of proves a lot of points that Gadd made by the way she speaks about, I don't date little boys. He stalked me. And the funny thing is, in his piece, he actually says, I may not have, I may have brought a lot of this on myself by encouraging this affection that he felt starved for.
Hmm.
So it was all kind of there. This internet sleuthing thing is a very interesting thing because even if they found her, I don't know. I don't even know if I believe her because she seems to act like the character. She seems to be an unreliable narrator, and I think she didn't do herself any favors in this. Piers Morgan, of course, the worst tabloidy place to take.
Well, I was gonna say, like, this is the thing that I resent, Leila, is being put in this position, put in this position of having to determine whether she's a reliable narrator or not, because I think that the show does a wonderful job of sort of complicating the reality of a person, of saying, like, here are all the things that somebody might struggle with. Here's how they might present themselves. Also, should they be out in front of not just any media, but out of all people, a place like Piers Morgan, which does not seem like the kindest form of media. Let's put it, to put it mildly. As you sort of watch this whole conversation unfolding, Leila, does it change how you think about the show, how the show landed with people, how it resonated with people?
No, because I don't feel like the show's point was all about like calling out of like, oh, look at this person, look how kind of freaky they are at all. I think the show is very much centered around like how somebody like moves through trauma and how that maybe like ends up resulting in art. But then also that whole thing of like, you don't have to be grateful to the terrible things that happen to you, even if they push you into like a positive creative space, I suppose. But like there is a really horrible tradition of this in the UK. We had a show on this for years that was kind of our equivalent of Jerry Springer, I suppose, but worse, called Jeremy Kyle. And like it came out when like several people died off the back of that show, that like the thing that they would do is they would check what mental health medications that you were on. So there is this idea of like, what type of mental health crisis and issue do you need to have to make you great television? And it's horrible. And I'm so sad that we're back to it.
Yeah, I think like this is a good place to leave it because I'm gosh, I'm tired of this conversation, but also B, like this idea of, first of all, she is a reality show figure. She could be a reality show figure in the future. That feels uncomfortable to me. The idea that she's become famous, that also feels uncomfortable to me. I would like to be done with this conversation, but I don't think we are. But we got to leave it there for now and keep it moving because we got to talk about this.
Sometimes when I'm down and all alone, all I ever need is you. Come and follow rainbows, I am told.
The most powerful iPad ever is also the thinnest.
All I ever need is you.
Okay, so let me explain what you just heard there, other than the Sonny and Cher song. That is a bit of a new Apple ad that just came out. It shows the range of human creativity. It shows toys and instruments and books and sculptures and just beautiful things, all kind of being crushed by a hydraulic press. It's just kind of being crushed further down. And then when the press lifts up, all that stuff has been replaced by this new iPad Pro. They tell you, hey, this is our thinnest iPad ever. The internet is not into this ad. The internet is not buying it. A lot of people think that the ad is sort of celebrating technology taking over all of these traditional hands-on, tactile ways of creating art. We saw celebrities like Hugh Grant have piled on. He said in a tweet, the destruction of the human experience courtesy of Silicon Valley. Apple has apologized for this ad, which is not a thing that I personally saw coming. Vikram, what do you make of the ad and all the backlash that is created?
I mean, I don't like the ad especially, but I will say that I don't think it's any worse than a lot of the other kind of tech ads that I've seen. I think there's like a Google Pixel ad where a guy is jumping and he sort of edits reality to make it seem like he's jumping higher. And I found that kind of depiction of photo manipulation as a way of like editing reality for your own benefit to be as gross as what this Apple ad sort of implies.
Yeah.
I do think like the generous read of it is very much that they're taking all of human creativity and kind of putting it in this one thing for everyone to access. I can see that perspective of it, but I think it's like as gross and as sort of hacky and a weird as any kind of tech ad, especially the invocation of Sonny and Cher, which is sort of gives it like a kind of like a happy-go-lucky feeling to it. But I don't know if I think people claiming that this is some sort of new level of egregiousness. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think it's about the same level of egregiousness as all of these kind of ads.
Paul, I think Vikram just called me dramatic. I think that's what's happening here. I'm being called dramatic love. I mean, I had a strong reaction to this ad, which is that I had a sort of immediate, God, I think I hate this, but I'm not really sure if I've explored it further than that. Where do you land on this ad, Paul?
Well, there's two things that came to mind immediately were that Tim Cook is not Steve Jobs, and for whatever that means.
Yeah.
And Steve Jobs, the famous 1984 ad, threw a hammer at a screen to vanquish Big Brother. There's an entirely different energy at work there.
Yeah.
The idea of using violent smashing in this context, and I think the big deal here is they could have depicted squeezing those things into their little thin iPad in a way that didn't destroy those things.
Yeah.
They could have made some other science fiction-y looking thing that made all the great art in the world at your fingertips, which is what they're trying to say. We can argue whether that's true or not. I don't personally. I just think that the ad was. You're right. The jokey music gave it a sense that this was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
given the delicate nature of art versus the AI and all those things, we have a huge conversation going. Justine Bateman, of course, took it even further by quoting the authoritarian handbook for destroying the arts as a way to fascism, which, I mean, we can talk about techno-fascism probably in another show, but
I don't think we have the time to talk about techno-fascism today, but yes.
So I think, my first feeling was you could have not smashed them. You could have merged them. You know, the smashing and the light music about it is alarmist. It triggers an alarmist feeling in me.
I agree with that.
I should note our producer Amelia noted this morning that the hydraulic press thing is it's also a TikTok trend, right? Like you see this regularly occurring TikTok trend where people watch a hydraulic press just crush various objects down. They're actually genuinely very satisfying videos, and I think like Apple might be trying to be in conversation with that trend.
That's probably it. Yeah.
But Leila, like, you know, is this a case of the internet looking for something to get angry about, or is there, as Paul just said, an idea of an alarm bell going off?
No, I think there's a legitimate alarm bell going off. And I think the people on the internet that are reacting strongly towards this are those, and I count myself amongst this number, the terminally online, who have a sneaking suspicion that we might be like creating the apocalypse somehow, and are sort of like fortifying the thing that will come to eventually destroy all culture and human life. And this just felt like, yeah, Skynet was sending us for a message of like, we are coming for you. And I mean, having friends that worked in advertising, you think of like the number of people that had to approve this before it went out. It's really astonishing. Although maybe that's a good argument for the machines to take over, because clearly people are doing it.
Well, I gotta say, Vikram, like it created quite a bit of conversation around the office, like yesterday and today. Even this morning, like I was sort of expressing my discomfort with this ad, and a couple of people in the office were saying, well, isn't it kind of just getting at the truth, which is like, we don't look at sculptures. We don't, like fewer and fewer people are playing music in these ways, but they're actually like engaging with the entirety of not the entirety, but all of the music that is available in terms of, in streaming instead of like record players. Like there is something truthful about this ad, and maybe that's the discomfort. Maybe the discomfort is that we are in the process, or at least some of us are in the process of crushing the entirety of the human experience into the thinnest iPad ever or whatever. And if that is true, then isn't this ad just saying, actually, it's kind of already happening, and here's what it looks like? Because I'm imagining that was the argument that they made in the boardroom when they were pitching that ad.
Yeah, probably. I should say right off the bat that like I think people should look at sculptures and play the cello and paint and all that.
I'm with Vikram. I don't want to be included in this we that you speak.
I don't think all that should be replaced by an iPad.
Fair enough.
I just like I as much as like the computer allows for access to all the information in the world, nothing still beats like a person in front of you actually kind of doing their art or performing in some way. I think whatever new invention that Apple cooks up, it's not going to take away kind of the feeling of that. and they can try with however many ads they make, but I don't really think that that's going to be taken away. I do think that there was a miscalculation fundamentally of how this was going to be received and how the message they wanted to convey. I think going off of Paul's point, there was probably a version of this that, again, I think all of these ads are kind of gross in one way or another, but there's probably a version of the ad that would be like, oh, we're merging these things into something that, that can be kind of accessed and experienced in one way. But instead of, you have this kind of like gross, gleeful sort of crushing metaphor that ultimately, angered all the, people for right reasons. I guess just my point is that these ads are all kind of gross because they're all trying to codify, humanity into a neat little technological bubble.
Yeah, it turns out that humanity cannot be squished into those things. Okay, we got to move on to the next thing. I want to talk about Doctor Who in just a moment, but I want you to hear this clip.
Ruby, you want to know my secret? I have the whole universe at my fingertips. And I'm all on my own. I'd love it if you came with me.
Who are you?
I'm the Doctor.
That is a bit of the latest reboot of Doctor Who, which debuts on Disney Plus this weekend. This version of the show stars Ncuti Gatwa from the hit series Sex Education as a time-traveling doctor. Paul, I understand you've never been the biggest Doctor Who fan. Do you, do you look at this and go, you know what, maybe I'll be on board this time?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I've dabbled. When Jodie Whittaker joined, I wanted to see what that was like. I remember thinking some of the other doctors were, actors that I admired. But my thing is, I'm generally not somebody who watches this kind of time travel-y thing. I'm sorry, I'm no fun at parties, but but I will say, because you asked me to, I was pleasantly surprised, and I love him in this, and I love her too.
Yeah,
and I think actually just like the clip you played when he says, "I'm the doctor," it's just like he's the Scottish by way of, I guess, Rwandan ancestry. Yeah, and he's so elegant and so cool, and he takes us on this journey, and then it gets to something that I've spent a lot of time. Are we allowed to even talk about episode 3? I mean,
no, not yet, but yeah.
Well, but I mean, it's funny because Apple's the theme today, I think. But just it was so brilliant of them to talk about the death of music. Yeah. And the Beatles, two things that are, where the Apple ad might have been crushing, handmade music, and the Beatles are relevant in the news again, as they always seem to be. Yes. And I was just pleasantly taken on this journey. It's you have to buy into this whole world that everything's fantastical. Yeah. There's nothing quite realistic about it. At the same time, the social commentary is like pretty great. So I give it 2 thumbs up. I have 2 thumbs. Yes. Okay,
you're on board. So okay? All right. Welcome to the fandom. Leila, can we just talk a little bit about Ncuti, because he's the first queer Black doctor to play Doctor Who. What impact, if any, do you think that's going to have on the stories that are being told here?
I think Doctor Who has over the generations been played by so many different people, and as much as kind of the vast majority white men, they were all brought different aspects to him, but kind of when you see them as a collective, you can sort of absorb what is the core of Doctor Who, and to me that's someone that you would kind of no questions ask, buy their story, believe in that there are time traveling aliens, and just be you know what, I'm with you, I'm coming as your assistant. You seem to know what's so it's just a charisma and a magnetism. Yeah. And I think what's so interesting, I think Jodie Whittaker did it as well, and it's happening so much in this version where it's it's the race and the queerness doesn't matter so much as the raw magnetism of the guy, and I think that's just been captured so well. I loved it.
Well, I love the raw magnetism of all of you. Thank you so much for doing the show. Thank you for being here. This has been a delight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
And that is a wrap, everybody, on another Commotion Group chat. Leila Latif is a critic for Total Film, The Guardian, and other publications in London. Vikram Murthi is a contributing writer for The Nation, based in Brooklyn. And Paul Myers is an author and host of the Record Store Day podcast in Berkeley, California. And listen, that is it for the show. My name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. By the way, you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Instagram. We are at Commotion CBC. We are going to be back next week. I hope to see you then. Thank you.